presentation for us. But before we begin, I'd like to start by having a land acknowledgement. So we respectfully acknowledge that Dufferin County resides within the traditional territorial and ancestral lands of the Tinatani, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. We also acknowledge that various municipalities within the County of Dufferin reside within the treaty lands named under the Haldimand Deed of 1784 and two of the Williams Treaties of 1818, Treaty 18, the Nottawasaga Purchase, and Treaty 19, the Ajinatans Treaty. These traditional territories upon which we live and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways and resources. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of a brief intro for Professor Caldwell. Wayne Caldwell, who has his PhD as a registered professional planner and has his FCIP designation, is a professor emeritus in rural planning at the University of Guelph School of Environmental Design and Rural Development. His expertise includes agricultural planning, farmland preservation, rural community health, and community-driven economic and environmental initiatives. He has authored and edited numerous books on rural planning and development, contributing to policies and best practices that support sustainable rural communities. Dr. Caldwell has also served as president of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and has led various local, provincial, and national organizations focused on rural and environmental planning. So you guys probably don't want to hear me talk anymore, so I'm going to pass it over to Professor Caldwell, who has a very engaging presentation for us.
Thanks very much, Raj. And I will begin with the folks online. I'm going to be standing up a little bit and sitting down a little bit. If you can't hear me because the microphone's a number of feet away, let us know. I think Anil will be monitoring any emails that come in or text messages. So do let us know if you can't hear me adequately. So big thanks for the invitation to be here today. I owe many thanks to Jasmine, who's not here today, but for helping to organize it, and for Raj and Anil for helping introductions and coordination and so on. And it's always great to know that we have people in the room that can answer the tough questions. So glad to know that they're here. Right off the bat, I don't pretend to be an expert of what's happening in Dufferin County. I have some experience that's broader than that will hopefully be of interest to people. But we have some fantastic expertise in the room, and I know we have folks online as well. And maybe just to get a sense of who is in the room, and it's tricky. In fact, the folks online can answer this too by just raising your hands, which we'll be able to see on the screen. How many people are here as farmers? Okay, we've got, great, we have half a dozen or more farmers in the room. And again, folks on the screen, feel free to raise your hand so you can respond to it as well. How many people are here as municipal councillors? I know there's some overlap, but we have a number of municipal councillors here. How many folks are here as planners? Land use planners? Oh, great, we have a half a dozen people in the room to that effect. Economic development as well, building officials. I know we have at least one. Did I miss anyone in that categorization of folks? Administrator, of course. How could I do that? And yeah, I know we have the Federation of Agriculture as well. And the other really big question is how many people stayed up for the entire 18 innings of the game the other night? I see Raj is nodding yes. Anybody else? I got to inning 16. It's 2:15. I had the same dilemma, right? How do you handle it? Maybe we can get the slide screen showing there. And once that arrives, we'll get moving into that. So hopefully.
Wayne, could we just see who's online? Like we can't see, could they even just say who they are and then we could say who we are?
It would be good. I don't know if they have microphone capabilities online.
Or even if folks just want to write in the chat kind of where you're from. I know I see some representation from Olathe on there. I think there's members of the public as well, but yeah, you can shout that out as soon as people
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't know if folks could hear that from back and back there, but if people wouldn't mind just putting it into the chat box where you're from, that would be helpful. And why don't we do, I don't want to lose too much time to introductions, but let's do quick introductions around the room. And again, encourage folks to speak loud enough that people online can hear as well. We'll start with the gentleman here on my left.
Guy Gardels, I'm a farmer, broiler operator. I'm also the mayor of East Carrick-Fraxton, county councillor as well.
I'm Gail Little. I also a farmer and deputy mayor of Emmerich, and well, that's at a construction company owner.
I'm Lisa Hearn. I'm a member service representative for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I'm a farmer too.
Debbie Vandenecker, I am the policy planner with East Carrick-Fraxton, and I'm also doing because we're a private consulting firm, also doing the official plan for the land.
I'm Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the municipal clerk for East Carrick-Fraxton.
I'm Becky Norton, the chief building official for Dufferin County. And I'm Cassie Crawford, I'm the communication coordinator.
Good afternoon. I'm Leo Lauer. I'm a farmer in Dufferin County and a farmer in Emmerich and Langston. I'm also director of the Dufferin Federation of Agriculture and I'm the director of the Farmers of Ontario. And we need land to farm.
I continue to agree with that. Let's get Raj at the back there. I'm not sure if you introduced yourself right at the outset.
Yeah, my name is Raj Sain. I'm the director of development and tourism for Dufferin County.
My name is Oda. I'm the senior planner with the Dufferin.
Janet Horner, farmer, Marion Mulmer, and board of Dufferin.
I'm Gursaman Samra, senior planner for Dufferin. Sean Corso, I'm on the Orangeville BIA as well as Mahim farmer.
Good stuff. And we'll go here. Was it Brian?
Yep, Ryan Atkinson, farmer.
Good stuff, Brian.
Tracy Atkinson, I'm the CIO of planner, and I also live on a farm.
Good stuff.
Pete F. Custis, I'm the CEO of East Carrick-Fraxton.
Rob Stoll Jr., planner for Stoll and Associates.
Mark Reeser, a farmer from Waterloo and director of both.
Great to have you here, Mark. Mark's often been at sessions I've been involved with and is a great spokesperson for agriculture. Do we have any old folks online having identified where they're from?
Yeah, do you want me to send it out?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, we have very old businesses at college, Fair Center for Agriculture. We have Mark Fisher, who's a student in the rural planning and development program at E. We have Andrea Hasler, who's the director of planning for
Hi, Andrea.
Duncan Young, policy analyst for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, specializing in land use and planning and related farm property matters. Marilyn Cameron, who's the planner with J.L. Richards and Associates, as well. Sarah Reed, who's the policy advisor for OMAFA, former and then Tina Lofar, Valley, planner with the town of and then Dr. Christopher Alpula, who is the manager of planning services. Oh, someone said they can hear Wayne, but they can't hear us.
Okay.
You know what? I will probably, anyone who wants to speak, I'll turn on the speaker and just pass it around.
Great. Hopefully you guys can hear me a little bit better now. I think that's mostly everyone actually that I mentioned.
That's great.
Okay. Yeah, and they can hear me better too.
It is great to have so much representation from Dufferin and good to hear a few people from outside of Dufferin on as well. So I invite those folks. Probably the best way for folks online to communicate is via the chat box. And again, Anil will monitor that because I see we have people from Perth County and Guelph and other places as well, Amherstburg. So we have folks from some distance. So it's great to know that the word of Dufferin County has got out there and it's attracted some folks. So what I'm going to be speaking today is land use planning for agricultural prosperity. Jasmine said, well, can you talk about tariffs? Well, I'm not an economist. I don't have a lot of expertise in that area at all, but I'm going to reflect on some of those issues and hopefully they will be of interest and invite folks around the room to contribute to that discussion as well. I subtitle it, Why You Should Care. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why I think this is really important to municipal councils, of course, to farmers, to other folks in society as well. And I'm reminded of a planning experience that I had probably 15 years ago now in Huron County. I spent much of my career working with Huron County as well as the university. And we were going through the nutrient management plan. Before the Nutrient Management Act, I don't know, Brian, if you're a livestock farmer or not, but for those folks who are livestock, you'll have dealt with nutrient management issues. And I remember sitting in a room, or standing, presenting, the county of Huron was attempting to put into place their own nutrient management bylaw before the province brought the legislation into effect. And I'm meeting with 100 angry pork producers, like hog farmers, who were really concerned that this was going to restrict them in some fashion. And what was the real turning point was the discussion and their realization that the county wasn't trying to be punitive to these people at all. They were trying to put in some rules because there was this real conflict going on between agriculture, livestock producers, and the cottage sector along the Lake Huron shorelines. Beaches were getting posted and so on. What we were simply trying to do was to establish some rules that producers could expand by that they found to be acceptable. And once that message got across, people saw, there's a real benefit in these rules and regulations to us as farmers because they set in place the framework by which we can grow and expand. And that was really key. So I'm going to try to cover some of those topics today from my perspective in terms of how it can benefit folks in Dufferin County for hopefully decades to come. So Anil, you're going to run we'll just advance to the next slide there.
You want me to?
Let's try that and see how it works out. Yeah.
And then, any questions or comments? I can't vote, but maybe at the end we can answer questions.
That sounds great. And I've got a few questions immersed in my presentations and not me simply talking. And I think we have 2 hours until 4 o'clock, I think is what we're scheduled until. And people with that in mind, people need to get up and take a break, just get up and head on out. See the washrooms are just around the corner to our right there. And that's always the key thing to make sure we identify. So what folks are seeing on the screen at the moment is planning for the future. Why is this important? And I've often reflect, particularly in agriculture, how there's trend lines, right? I remember growing up as a kid and the yield that my dad would get for corn might be 100 bushels to the acre. And that my brother now will aim for 250 bushels to the acre, right? That trend line continues up. But what we wonder about is that little blue blob in the center, which represents a critical event that changes the trend line. Because after that trend line changes, the question is, do things go this way, they continue in the same line, or do they in fact embark on a downward curve? So can someone think, what would be an example of that blue blob, a critical event that changes the trend line? What would be some examples of what you might see historically as something that's come along that affects that trend
The
line?
election of Donald Trump.
Yes.
Back to tariffs.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll touch upon that a little bit because my goodness, who would have thought? What other kinds of things might come along?
From a cropping perspective is the climate,
Yeah,
one way or the other.
absolutely. How does that change things? Like, do we see an increase or do we see a decrease or do things remain the same?
Right. And so this year, as an example, we've got pockets there that have seen a major downturn and other pockets who are having record yields.
Yeah.
Just depending which way the climate went with you.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's get a couple more items identified that could be that little blue blob that changes things. It changes that trend line from where we were to where things are going.
Significant policy changes?
Significant policy changes, new government comes in and things change, and who would have thought, right? Mark?
The invention of the tractor.
The adventure of the tractor, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Those kinds of things, in the generation before, right? Who would have thought? Raj? The environment, right? All kinds of things that we could flag from the environmental perspective that starts to change things.
Wars and pandemics.
Yes, wars and pandemics, that's right. Who would have thought that COVID, like literally, who would have thought, that in our lifetime COVID would come along because of such a distant past, those kinds of impacts. So the point I bring to attention there is my focus through my research and through what we'll be talking about today in some ways comes back to that blue blob, that critical event that changes the trend line. Go to the next slide, please. So, and why is it important to think about that blue blob? Because I think at different scales, things impact us. So I'm reminded of a little story. I took a group of students to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. Anybody been to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania? Yeah, perhaps the most intense landscape for agriculture that I've seen in North America, like small farms, silos everywhere, like lots of livestock production. And we're meeting with this Mennonite farmer, and he had probably 9 or 10 children running around. He'd just come home from the hospital that day. And he was talking about his challenges. He was farming in a space not unlike that map that you can see there. He was surrounded by different kinds of things. you could start to feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. And out here is a new condominium happening, over here's a new industrial development, over here's a new subdivision, all of this stuff happening around him. And again, he's come home from the hospital, there's all these children running around, and he turns to us and he says, can you help me? Can you help me? Well, there wasn't anything that we could do as planning students and a professor from Canada visiting him. But what we did do is come away with the recognition of how land use policy fundamentally can impact people in a way that changes their lives and livelihoods forever. And that's what he was dealing with. Can you help me? And what's that future look like? So I think at the level of the individual farmer, you and your farm, you Brian and your farm, what are the things going on around me that impact how I make a livelihood? Let's go to the next slide. So not only is it important at that scale of the individual farmer, it's also important at a global scale. You mentioned, sorry, name's just slipping me already. Guy. Mentioned climate change, right? And there's an example. These are forecasted issues of productivity up to the year 2080. The areas in green are forecast to gain in productivity. Reflects a little bit about what you said, Guy. The areas in orange, yellow, and red, the red, dark red is losing up to 25 to 30% 25% or more of their productivity. The areas in green forecast to gain, light green 5 to 10%, 10 to 25%, and so on. We have the good fortune of living in an area that's likely to see an increase in productivity, right? That's what the forecast here would suggest to us. And whether it's individually correct or not doesn't matter so much, as generally speaking, that's what we're going to see over our lifetimes, right? We're likely to see areas gain significant productivity and areas lose significant productivity. So the question I have is, what does this mean from a moral and ethical obligation that we have as Canadians to protect the land that we have that's important for agriculture when much of the rest of the world will be starving? Like, what does that mean for us to have that land that's forecast to gain in productivity when virtually all of Australia, virtually all of the African continent, virtually all of South America, virtually all of the southern part of the US, virtually all of India is forecast to lose significant productivity? What does that mean? So that makes, for me, planning important not only at the scale of the individual farmer, but important at the scale of a nation, a province, a region, a continent. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm really intrigued how those colors kind of follow country lines a little bit. And why, for instance, I think that must be Egypt. Why is it going 25% everything around it, the rest of Africa, except for some country further in the southeast, seeing either stable or
and I don't really have the answer to that. The fact it follows individual lines, I can understand that, because that's, of course, based on census data and all of that kind of information that will flow into it. And the ability to break up the US, for example, into 5 different climate and 5 different zones, again, will represent some of that local geography. And we have countries for which there's no data that show up as gray. And why Egypt specifically gaining productivity, I don't know, but the forecasts are that it would. And again, it doesn't so much matter if that's right or wrong, but rather in a general sense, we will lose productivity in many regions and we will gain productivity in other regions. And that creates an imbalance relative to what we've seen historically. So what do you think are some of the key issues impacting Dufferin County? And these can be quite wide ranging. I'd like to have a dozen responses or so from people. So just start shouting them out. What do you think of the issues? And again, folks online, feel free to send something in the chat and Neil will pull that out for us. But what do you think are the key issues impacting Dufferin County? And if you're from Perth County, you can ask the same question of yourselves, or if you're from some other location, you can ask the question as well. So
The population changes, pressures.
yeah, population changes and pressures, right? We're starting to see that, the aging of the baby boom group. My hair color is a little different than it was 10 years ago, right? I'm in that group that's getting older, right? What other kinds of issues do you see impacting Dufferin County?
Well, we have significant loss of agricultural land due to rural suburbs.
Significant loss of ag land.
We're at a little bit of a watershed issue with the municipal plan.
Yeah.
But it seems that a lot of people have been able to get around it.
Yeah.
Some of our councillors, none of them here, of course, that have been happy to see a lot of that development, I think.
Yeah.
So in Amaranth, there's a number of us that we just objected to every severance proposal on agriculture.
Okay. for folks online that might not have heard that, and again, invite folks to speak loudly, hopefully the microphone can pick it up, but the issue of severances, right, and what that means for farmland and the protection of it. Other things, Peter?
I gotta say lack of industrialized land, right? We got some major industries wanting to relocate, come up here and look at us, and the lack of that.
Okay, lack of industrial land mentioned, servicing.
Servicing,
connection
yeah.
To that too. I'm looking at Lisa because I know she'll have an idea.
Well, I think just tagging on to what Leo said, not just the severances and the loss of farmland, but the effects that has on the livestock sector, because we have less and less room to go with every severance that happens.
So impacts of severances on the livestock sector. So some of those changing patterns in agriculture, how we avoid them, how we encourage them as well. Anyone else? A couple more points would be great to hear.
On-farm diversified uses, rural or agriculturally related tourism, some of the other additional uses that are being permitted on those farm parcels, and to which degree they're limited.
The on-farm diversified uses, and that's changing. It reminds me of a little story. Years ago when I was working as a planner in Dufferin County, this would be back in the, dare I say the 1980s, but they say the 1980s, and you get a phone call from a farmer, and he said, well, I got these people wanting to store a boat in my barn, and he said, please don't ask. I wish you wouldn't ask the question, because the policy framework wasn't there to allow it. It now is, and that's something. How do you take advantage of that and create opportunities for that? Let's just go on to the next slide then. So this is
Also want to mention, Marilyn mentioned extreme weather events, so flooding.
absolutely extreme weather events. That's a good thing. Mark, you want to point to add to that?
Wayne, you got a picture there of Beaver Dam.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that in the past, that would have been dealt with quietly and quickly, and perhaps under the authority of a municipality. But now with so many people out in the countryside being of urban background, that's looked upon as something to be protected, not realizing that it may negatively affect people whose farmland is flooded.
For folks who might not
Dam big enough to then they get flooded, and then all of a sudden they want action.
For folks online that might not have heard that, Mark has identified the Beaver Dam and what that means from a natural heritage perspective. Should it be protected? Should it not? How that's a change from the past. Madam Warden.
I would say aging infrastructure, our road systems and some of the support that we need, not only in the municipalities, but and outside urban centers. We have some bridges that need replacing and roads that need to be built up to accommodate increasing traffic levels.
Absolutely. Aging infrastructure, and what does that mean for rural communities? Because, boy, these things are expensive to replace if they need to be replaced.
Well, just one other thing. So there's a lot of farms bought by non-farm people. That's maybe even the racist or stereotypical argument. But people buy a farm, so they come to us and say, well, can you help us with this? It's every good money about it. And if they can't do that, then we'll see if we can get an aggregate dumped on their farm. Sometimes they get away with that. So and then there's other things. They decide to build a farm, a house, 2/3 of the way back, and lots of aggregate laying in. The laying doesn't follow a lot line. It goes and meanders right through the whole farm. So we're losing a lot of farmland just to the way that, even if it's within all the bylaws and it allows it to just, you're really compromising the farm, in my opinion, the way we allow development to happen. In this case, it's probably just a residence, but it's allowed use on a 100-acre farm. Somebody can afford a 100-acre farm, but you just lost 20% of the land. It's a lot more problematic. The land you get right around this next thing. So we're still compromising land that is going out of production, probably not readily coming back in.
Leo's just mentioning the issue of non-farm uses in the countryside, aggregates, subdivisions, all of that is sometimes part of that. And what does that mean for the rural community?
One new trend seems to be the importation of fill on the aggregates, right? Because we know that there's all this soil that needs to get moved from further south, and they need to store it somewhere. So they're coming to all our older end-of-life aggregate sites. So the importation trucks coming the other way is a more recent phenomena that's impacting Dufferin.
So go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say the whole impact of COVID.
Right.
People can work remotely, so people can live in places far away from the formal place of work. And all the accompanying issues that go along with that, like the paving of every road, which changes the countryside completely. That one would not expect from something like COVID, but it certainly has an effect. Yeah. People from the city want city services in countryside.
Again, are folks able online, maybe you can just respond to Neil, whether you can hear the comments coming from folks in the audience. I won't repeat them if you are, but maybe just a couple people would comment to Neil and he can let us know. But the comment there was COVID in the countryside and what that does to changing services and how important that is.
The worst things that ever happened to me was my road was paved. It's now a commuter road instead of a country gravel road.
So online, what you see is I've asked that question of folks for many years doing different presentations, and on there's 18 issues, many of which you've covered. And if we hit the next slide just for a second, I'm not going to go over all of those points, but suffice it to say, there are a range of issues confronting rural and small town communities, right? They will vary by municipality and so on. But those are the kinds of things that many of us will share, threats to tourism, in rural communities, relatively low incomes, impacts of evolving agriculture and so on. Next item there, just to touch upon it. And it's something anyway, someone say something about tariffs. Well, we did have tariffs come up through the election that happened south of the border. So those evolving rural issues are the kinds of things that as planners and as economic development officials and so on, and as municipal councillors, many of those you're trying to address. Let's go to the next slide. So a question again for folks, what do you think are the key tariff-related impacts on agriculture? So what do you, coming back to Jasmine, would hope I covered to a degree at least, what do you think are some of those tariff-related impacts on agriculture that are in here?
Purchasing of equipment.
Purchasing of equipment, in the sense of not having access to
higher prices, because a lot of the equipment is built in the States or comes from the States.
Shifts in demand for certain produce or items. Or,
shifts in demand for certain produce and items.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty everywhere.
Uncertainty, exactly, uncertainty. Yeah.
Well, for us, this is a secondary cause. So Mr. Trump, he launches these trade wars with primarily China. So they're not buying any soybeans. So the price of soybeans is largely determined on the Chicago Board of Trade. So our price is down, but they really support the farmers. So they have this big, beautiful bill. They have very generous programs prior to that, but we're going to be at about $200 disadvantage per acre because of government direct support to farmers. And our government doesn't acknowledge that we have a need. But yet we have these grains still trade freely, so it's not a tariff issue on grains going on either side of the border. But we don't get this mailbox support to compete with them.
Absolutely. The absence of subsidies and tariff support in this country.
Tariffs have probably also brought about some opportunities to produce products that were formerly imported or to brand them as product of Canada and have generally good uptake from consumers.
So new opportunities. We'll talk about some of those as our session goes along too. Anything else? Yeah, Raj.
So just from online, we have someone that stated exporting the excess production will no longer be efficient with the higher prices of transportation.
Okay. So the point there was exporting materials and high cost of transportation. Let's go to the next slide. So this next slide was my attempt to try to address that question and again repeat some of the things that the folks here have mentioned. So just, a key tariff-related issues affecting ag in Dufferin County, market uncertainty, right? Do I invest in that new barn or not, right? Particularly, like, anybody here a dairy farmer? Right? I mean, we keep hearing the government say that dairy supply management will remain. I don't know. When push comes to shove and there's things on the line, who knows how that sector will be dealt with. So market uncertainty, export markets, and we're seeing that particularly with canola in Western Canada as an example. Soybeans were mentioned. Investment implications related a little bit to dairy farmers as an example, and others too. Do I invest now or not? Is the timing right or is it not in terms of the things that I might want to do? Supply chains, movement of things like fertilizers as an example. How is that occurring? I don't know. I'm not followed the price of fertilizer other than I know it's expensive.
Well, we still pay a tariff on fertilizer,
Okay.
so we don't get Russian fertilizer, but it still impacts our price.
Absolutely.
And
So,
we have we talked about industrialization, and I'm all for that, but the Canadian regulatory climate isn't favorable for doing investments for a lot of the inputs we need. People won't invest there. They'd rather, well, there's a reason all our fertilizer started coming from Russia and China and Belarus, because they don't have the same environmental regulations for putting up the plants.
I had a tour last week, and a number of other folks in this room did too, of the fertilizer facility, and you'll have to remind me, Janet.
FS over at, just north of Alston.
And just, very visually, you see the, must have been 18 different bins of different fertilizer components, and you're absolutely right. Some of those come from one source, some come from another, and I can appreciate how those supply chains that lead to that fertilizer product in your field, how are they impacted? So supply chains, price volatility, and that's been mentioned already by Leo. Community and land use implications. Again, what does that look like in terms of what are the demands on land? How does it deal with agriculture versus residential and so on? And how are those things impacted? And of course, increased production costs across the board. Sometimes people will feel it, sometimes they may not, depending on what they're doing. And that again speaks to the kinds of things we need to be thinking about in terms of dealing with some of these issues connected to there. So those are, again, repeating, I think, a number of the points that you folks mentioned in advance. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Well, just on export markets, Mr. Trump and our fearless leader are over in Southeast Asia somewhere, trying to cook up all kinds of deals. Whether it's going to affect us one way or the other, I don't know. But at the stroke of a pen, there are some very significant damages occurring. So I also happen to be a canola grower, and I guess we'd rather produce. I'm a canola grower.
Okay, yeah.
So we'd rather produce autos than support our canola growers, because we signed on to this tariff to please the Europeans and the Americans, but they don't come to bat for us on our canola.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it seems that, some of these industries are expendable to save others that are still devious, and from my point of view.
Great points for sure. So this, just to bring a little bit of focus back to Dufferin, and thanks to the OFA for having produced this cheat sheet of the right, if you like. 2 or 3 things I wanted to pull out of that. One, and folks may not be able to see it right here so well, but the 19% of local farm sales that occur. So folks looking online, 19% of farms in Dufferin County spend a fair bit of time and energy selling directly to consumers. And that's an important statistic, and it speaks to some of the changes that are happening. And also towards the bottom, I just wanted as well to pull out the 19% or 20% generating renewable energy, including solar, bio solids and things of that nature, which is interesting to see. So it just speaks to some of the changes that are happening in Dufferin County as things continue to evolve. 35% of the farm operators are female. Again, real change from previous generations in terms of how that continues to unfold. So just want to keep Dufferin County in mind as we're talking about some of these things. Next slide, please. So this is something that Lisa provided to me. They had Dufferin Federation of Agriculture had Kevin Eby do a review of the county policies, and there was a quote in there in particular that I wanted to pull out because it speaks to the direction that official plans can be moving in as they're connected to agriculture. And Kevin noted in particular the issues of climate change, housing affordability, aging populations, food security, all things that we spoke to in a little bit earlier, the need for walkable communities, the importance of financially and environmentally sustainable development. The goal should be movement towards development of communities that meet these challenges. So this is the kind of thing that Raj and Anil will be dealing with on a daily basis, working in the official plan. Are we starting to move in that direction to achieve some of those outcomes? And I thought that was just a good quote to put in there as background to some of the other content we're looking at. We'll go to the next slide, please. And I really think that as we start to look at tariffs and trade uncertainty, remind us that agriculture's success isn't just about global markets. It's about the flexibility and resilience of our local land use policies. And it goes back to that 19% of producers in Dufferin who are selling directly to local folk. And by supporting on-farm diversification, which was mentioned earlier, housing, local markets, and adaptive infrastructure helps farmers weather volatility while strengthening agricultural prosperity in Dufferin County. And I think those are all appropriate goals for us to be thinking about. How land use policy is so directly connected to fundamental viability on the farm and economic opportunities as well. Go to the next slide, please. I should say the slides that are in here, Jasmine was really good to send me a whole bunch of slides from Dufferin County, so I've tried to incorporate those. And you'll see the occasional picture from Huron counties. This is my grandson in front of all of those straw bales there. So the question is, why do you think land use planning matters to agriculture in Dufferin County? Everybody will have an answer to that. But just to put that out there again for a few moments for a question. So why do you think land use planning matters to agriculture in Dufferin County?
Well, people understand what the ground rules are.
People understand what the
There's a lot of
ground
people
rules
that seem to think that they should be able to do whatever they want, with the property they own. So why can't I subdivide this? Seems like a lot better use to me, especially for maybe my pocketbook, my retirement plan.
Do you have a hand up here?
Well, I was sort of going to say something similar, that it impacts what kind of agricultural operation you can run, and how large it can be, or how contained, or what kinds of things you can grow on your land, and your water supply. I mean, it just impacts everything.
Lisa?
I think it goes beyond that. It goes to the future, not the here and now. And I think we need to start thinking further, much further into the future than we currently are. And that's very difficult for people.
Come back to the 28 forecasted productivity rate, year 2080, which is what, almost 45 years from now. What the planet may look like at that point in time. Are we thinking of that kind of timeline?
I was going to say, it matters because we have growth pressures. Dufferin County is a popular spot for people to move out here. A lot of the people, as mentioned earlier, are not coming from an agricultural background. So whether they want to come and expand the urban boundaries, which will encroach on ag land, I think that's trying to separate the patterns, compatible uses, so there's no conflict, to minimize conflict.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, absolutely. I think both of those things are, how do we deal with the growth and how do we minimize conflict? And if I think of the growth, there's stuff happening, and I think people forget that planning done well will save the municipality and the community significant dollars, right? If it's done properly.
I think a lot of people take a look at bare land, especially people who aren't farming it, and saying, well, agricultural land is just that is yet to be developed.
Right.
And we've got to make sure that we can protect what's best. And not every piece of land in Dufferin County is good for farming, but we do have some really good lands here. And I think we've got to protect what we have for the long run. And not just, okay, yeah, let's sever this off. And today I have that extra money in my pocket. You're trying to protect that land for the generations to come.
Yeah, protecting the land for generations to come. Completely agree. Any other points? Yeah, Leo?
Yeah, as I get older, I wonder what kind of a legacy I may or may not want to leave. And every now and then I go to a Grand River, or now it's Saco River Conservation Authority presentation, and they talk about protecting habitat for endangered species and for pollinators and all that kind of thing. So, I'm interested in doing that. Personally, I'm going to have at least 10% of my acreage in bush. So I'm still quite a bit over that, but I'm just thinking a lot of this non-agricultural land, we don't seem to have expectations that they're going to be providing environmental goods and services. And some of these acreages are pretty significant. So they have a big lawn where they cut 5 or 10 acres of grass, and typically that's not the best environment for endangered critters. So I think some of our thinking and planning should shift. Well, if you have this land sitting here, why can't there be an expectation that they'll provide some environmental goods and services, and not just expect agriculture, more land out of agriculture to supply this? And I'm not against doing it, but I think everybody should be kind of tarred with the same brush, and I think we can be a lot more thoughtful as to what we do. And even cutting all the grass alongside the roads, there's often little critters there, and if you cut all the grass, you've just taken their habitat away. So just thinking, so a lot of people just don't even know or think about it. They think a nice manicured lawn is good because that's what they've been cultured to think looks good. But trying to see it from the vantage point of a little mouse or some other thing, rats, so you give it to them, I guess.
Yeah, keep your rats.
There's no discrimination there, Leo. I'm not opposed.
was interesting, the session a number of us were at last week, Keith Curry gave a keynote address, and I was really pleased to see how positively he spoke to conservation authorities, right? Because some conservation authorities sometimes get it. I think I have the wrong, no, sorry. But it was just really interesting how positively Keith spoke to conservation authorities, because sometimes you've got that end of the stick, so to speak. Debbie?
I think land use plan just generally sets your priority. So we do these plans all over the province, and sometimes rural development is advocated for. And in the scope of the people over 11%, it's an absolute no-go. It doesn't matter what the explanation is. So I think it is absolutely the set of priorities that you're willing to protect in that core policy document.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark and then Peter.
I would answer your question in a different way and say that the most effective way to preserve agricultural land is with good urban planning.
Yeah, I agree, and that'll come up in a bit of detail as we move on to Peter.
One thing I think also that why it matters for ag lands is the employment. Like people survive off of the agricultural land. And in addition to employment, it's sustaining the rural areas, right? Whether it's community infrastructure like a library, a public school, right? So you don't want to bus all those kids to not necessarily an urban area, right? So that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, the employment benefits of agriculture are very important. Let's go to the next slide.
Well, just one final point, since there's a bunch of Dufferin County people here. I've been living in Dufferin County almost 40 years, farming for about 30 years. And I just, for the longest time, it seemed that agriculture was completely off the radar for anybody in municipal politics, anybody working for the county or the townships. But there's a recognition now that finally people see that agriculture is actually the biggest economic driving force in the county. And to a lot of people that came as a surprise. So I'm thankful for the attention we're getting and the fact that we can discuss goals and future and how planning is important. So I'm grateful for the attention that is now given by both our politicians and staff. So thank you.
So, should have heard that. It was a big thank you. I'm not going to go. So here's 10 points I've identified why planning matters to agriculture in Ontario, Dufferin County. I'm going to go through each of those in a separate slide. So there's the list of 10. Let's go to the next one, which I think simply says, let's look at these 10 points in more detail. So let's go to the first one, which is the future of agriculture in Ontario and Dufferin County, in my view, is fundamentally connected to support planning policies and actions. And it comes back to the point that Mark mentioned about good urban planning. So I've intentionally included the slide there of what's happening in downtown Toronto, because to the degree that every time I drive into Toronto and I see a new condominium getting built, I think that's a win for agriculture, right? Because it's reducing pressure in agricultural areas. It's helping to concentrate population in urban centers. I think Raj, I don't know if you said you worked for Toronto.
Yeah, I used to work for the City of Toronto before coming to Dufferin, so it's very different.
Yeah, and I doubt that people in Toronto were thinking about a new condominium as a win for agriculture, but from my perspective, we do urban planning well, we achieve appropriate densities, and we avoid something like in that top slide, in my view, which isn't a particularly good use of land, and we think forward, and this is what Lisa was saying, think beyond the next term of council, think beyond the next 10 years, what's farming look like in 2050 in terms of agriculture and beyond. So.
Could I just add, Wayne, and I'll echo Kevin Eby. That picture of urban density isn't the only form of urban density that would work.
Right.
There are other forms that are probably somewhat more people friendly and would fit another demographic, another set of people that don't necessarily want to live 30 stories up. And if you look at cities in the world that are desirable places to live, and I'll reference Paris, France, they don't have skyscrapers. They have a level of density that is far denser than what we have, but it's viewed by most people as being a great place to live.
We'll see a slide that shows exactly that. I'm always captured by this statistic. What city had the highest density? Ancient Rome or downtown or Toronto today? And ancient Rome had a much higher density than downtown Toronto today, which I think is pretty incredible. Next slide, please. So I think a second reason why why planning matters, is this notion, and we've heard it from several of you already, is keeping agricultural land in agriculture, right? And in particular, dealing with two forms of urban development, the expansion of urban centers captured by the top slide, and the on-farm, the urban expansion in rural areas. It's used to call it urban development in rural areas, DERA, right? But it's both of those kinds of developments that we have as planners have to respond to and find ways of encouraging one format, an appropriate format, whether that is or not is going to be. But certainly that bottom one, that indiscriminate stuff happening in the countryside from an agricultural perspective, in my view, is a concern. Let's go to the next slide, please. And why do we protect farmland? And people will ask this question, and there's all kinds of answers to it. I've captured a half dozen here. Without farmland, there's no agriculture. Generally speaking, farmer livelihoods, food production, food security, economic contributions to agriculture, and certainly a resource for future generations. And I think all of those points have come up from all of you in one way or the other already. Mark?
Could I just add, Wayne,
Yeah,
that you
please.
should look at it in a wider perspective. When you look at the province of Ontario, only 5% of the land mass is agricultural land.
Yeah.
And only about 2% is
Yeah.
prime, class 1 and 2. Why in the world would you not protect that little tiny piece and utilize the rest of the province for something else?
Yeah.
But keep that agricultural land agricultural.
Yeah.
The problem, I think, is that we look outside and all we see is agricultural land. But you're only seeing a little teeny tiny piece of Ontario, or of Canada for that matter. You need to have a broader perspective.
It reminds me, Mark, it was at a conference once, and the focus was on Northern Ontario, right? So they had everybody in the room get up, and they said, everybody come over and stand in this little space. So the rest of the room is empty, and except for one person on the far side, and they say, this is Southern Ontario, and that's the rest of the province, right? Everybody in that one little corner, and that's barely how our population is distributed across the province, right? So it's a really good point to mention. Next slide, please. Whoops, I'll go back one. There we go. So provincial and local policy, and again, that particularly the provincial policy, they came out with a number of years ago. They put in a little tagline under the agricultural policies that is protecting agriculture for all sizes and forms. Because back in the day, there were municipalities across the province trying to ban pig barns, as an example, trying to affect the kind of agriculture. The province said, no, if it's agriculture, all forms, all sizes are permitted. And I've just tried to capture different pictures there, right? All the way from livestock production to farmers market sales, and of course people in the soybean fields. So that provincial and local policy, I think, is important from a planning perspective, that it does recognize and tries to encourage all of those different forms of agriculture. Next slide, please. So I've stolen this out of the Huron County official plan just to show that connection between planning document and agriculture can be really supported. So the Huron plan is so focused on agriculture from a number of points of view, and I've highlighted a couple of lines there. But Huron has the advantage of an informed and progressive farm community, a supportive service sector, high capability soils, a diversified agricultural industry, favorable climate, and limited non-farm intrusion. Agriculture has a significant economic contribution, economic impact on the county, and the continued health of agriculture is important not only from an agricultural perspective, but also from broader community and economic perspective. And I think that statement is really important because it says, from a fundamental perspective, the official plan in Huron County is all about trying to encourage and support that kind of activity. And to be honest, I've not read the Dufferin County official plan to see what it says about agriculture, but I'm sure there are positive words to that effect. But it's this notion of setting a policy and then following it through in terms of what decisions occur and what the bylaws do and all of those kinds of things. So I just think that I've captured that because it, to me, is a relevant statement. Next slide, please. So all sizes and forms, again, recognizing diverse production systems across the province and county, just to build on that a little bit. And I've just captured all the way from growing pumpkins and what that might do to beef farming, to large-scale corn production, to greenhouses, to the processing facilities as well. I'm sure a number of you will recognize that top greenhouse with all of that was from last week. All of those poinsettias being grown by the hundreds of thousands, right? The opportunities connected to that. Next slide, please. Again, why planning matters is that you aim for policy that's supported by farmers. And I just think that's so key in terms of making sure that you've had adequate discussions, that your planning documents are reflecting that you've got agriculture at the table in one format or the other. I know that Dufferin, as I understand it, has an ag advisory committee, and how important that can be to making sure that the issues that are important to agriculture are vetted through agriculture.
Well, no, I'm not sure one should totally rely on that point. And policies should be, good policies should be something that's supported by the majority of people,
Yeah.
whether they be urban or rural. So when you build something in urban, it's got to be something good.
Yes.
And in the past, we haven't always been very good at building things that are good.
Yeah.
In other words, you want to build a place where people want to live, not where they have to live.
As an example, I'm going to bring you to focus. I can't remember who was telling me the story. The light rail system in Waterloo, in the city water, Kitchener Waterloo, the important role that agriculture played in supporting that system. And I can't remember who told me, but specifically your leadership from an ag perspective, being at the table, making people understand that good urban planning, right, can be supported by agriculture. So I don't want to say anything about that. But it's just, it was, to me, it was a really interesting point that was made.
Well, I will say this, that we were questioned as to why we in agriculture in Waterloo were even at the table and even there. And we said, because this is the most important place where we can be. And what does good urban transit do? It facilitates higher densities, and higher densities preserve farmland. So it was intentional, and there was a plan, and we thought it made sense. And I think we've been, I think we were right.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and if we got to truck our produce somewhere, we can't put it on the transit system, but the roads won't be so congested so that we can move our products in, products out on less congested roads. Like I think Toronto, every time I go through there, I dread it. Yeah.
So going back to your initial point, Mark, I agree with it, but how important it is to make sure agriculture is at the table. Next point, please. And again, severance policy that's supporting agriculture. And again, I think it's planning matters for that reason, is that it provides the opportunity to have in effect good severance policies. And the next few slides build on this question. And I know Raj said severances continue to be a point of discussion. I think everybody here probably knows what a severance is, so I'll go through this really quickly. There's a 100-acre farm, and next to the button, and there's an example of potential severed lot right in the corner, right? Somebody might apply to have that removed from the farm parcel as a separate lot to put a house on. Not that that's going to get permitted, but this comes back to the debate that we had in Ontario 2 to 3 years ago, where the province was proposing 3 separate lots per farm parcel. I created a bunch of maps like this. But let's go to the next slide.
Can I just back up?
Yeah.
So in our, just prior to the recent changes, severances were supposed to be 2.5 acres a hectare. And I think that was to accommodate septic systems, but I'm sure there are technologies out there that would allow one to have a much smaller severance and not take 1.5 acre or 1 hectare or 2.5 acres. That's a lot of area for a house, and it's still, you know, everybody says, well, it's just incremental, but in 1 year in Amaranth, we had enough severances to take 100-acre farm out of production in just the small township of Amaranth.
I was at I can't remember again who I was speaking to, but they were saying in their municipality, and this was at the county level, the maximum size they allow is 1 acre, right? Which comes back to your points. But that does vary across the province. There's no provincial standard. Right? Let's go to go ahead, Mark.
Or the maximum some municipalities allow is 0.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Not allowed at all. And this kind of builds in that, actually. So this is research we did at the university, and I apologize for the fact that it was 2009. I had a colleague who did the next decade, but that data, for whatever reason, didn't include Dufferin County. But this is, these are provincial numbers you see here. We'll go to Dufferin in a moment. But that's tracking what has happened with retirement lot severances, and it's tracking what's happened across the province with surplus dwelling severances. So retirement lot severances were permitted prior to 2005 under provincial policy. Retirement lot severances were permitted in 2005. New provincial policy statement, which subsequent governments have maintained, do not allow retirement lot severances. And what I think is fascinating, you see that, you know, the lofty numbers back in 1990 for retirement purposes, how they're gradually being reduced. And then with the change in provincial policy, they dropped to 0. Right? Is what that. And likewise, the surplus dwelling severances, they've continued to be allowed. So you can see the numbers across the province as of 2009. We're sitting around that 200 number across the province. Let's look at the next slide, which builds on that. So this is an interesting one. What we did is we took that data and we said, okay, most people can relate to 1,000 acres, right? A concession block, you know, 10 farms, 100 acres each. And we said, well, how many severances on prime farmland were occurring per 1,000 acres? And you can see we have a high of, I think, in Essex of 6.78 severances over that 20-year period for residential purposes on farmland per 1,000 acres, right? So that means that beginning of that 20 years, you as a farmer, or I should say at the end of that 20 years, you as a farmer have another 7 residential neighbors around you within that concession block that you didn't have before. We can look at the lowest number, which is Perth County, probably everybody, just point out a couple of spots. Essex, Perth County, and Dufferin, which we'll come back to in a second. But Perth County with a number of 0.08 severances per 1,000 acres, virtually nothing, virtually zero severances over 20 years for residential purposes on prime farmland. And this is excluding urban areas, of course, but on agricultural and on farms. And of course here, folks were sitting at 1.9 severances per 1,000 acres, but the provincial average was 2.3 lots per 1,000 acres, so a little bit under the provincial average. But the difference that exists in Perth County for farmers at the end of that 20 years, things have virtually not changed at all. Whereas in Essex County, you've got 7 new severed lots, 7 new residences on 1,000 acres around you over that 20-year period. And we can also look to the, I should have pointed out Prince Edward County at 7.55, although it's a little bit different.
So Wayne, that's 2009. Have those numbers held or what's happening now?
I don't have the data for that, so I don't know. I would, some counties, it's going to be very similar. I'm not aware of there being any significant change in Dufferin. I don't know, Raj, if you can provide an update to that.
So for reference, I haven't been here for that long, but during my time, I've been come to be known outside of these walls as a person that says no to consent applications and lot line adjustments. So there have been a couple that have come across the county table. And we are very much in support of preserving our ag lands, whichever way we can. And so I guess that's my statement on that. And I think, Leo, to your point of the importance of ag, we at the county level, so economic development and planning fall under my portfolio. And I think there's a benefit to having both of those sit in one spot because we're able to advocate for the economic benefit of ag and how to plan for agriculture with, Mark, to your point about, or using sort of that urban frame of mind and that urban reference. And I think a lot of the times people don't necessarily see ag as an economic driver, but it actually is a huge driver for the county, whether it be your traditional ag, your on-farm diversified, or whatever. So to that 1.9 number, I'm hoping it's lower, but I can't say.
I would guess that it is, and the next slide will help us understand why I would say that. So those are the numbers for Dufferin County, again, that 1990 to 2009 time period. So you can see back in I'll just refer to that top on the left-hand side. You can see back in Dufferin, the average number per year in that time period, 1990 to 1996, was over 30 per year. Between 1997 to 2005, it dropped to under 20, and 2006 to 2009, it was a handful. And you'll know based on your applications if you're getting a lot of applications for severances on agricultural land or not. I'm going to guess you're not getting too many because provincial policy evolved over that time period. So it's more likely to be reflective of the 2006 to 2009 time period because that's where provincial policy took us by getting rid of the retirement lot severances. They had infill severances historically to change things. You know?
Well, we have rural land in various municipalities and how that happens.
And more in Amaranth than most.
And it's very arbitrary. So apparently the soil types and everything just change at the fence line. I didn't know that because when I farm 2 farms adjacent, I don't see that. But it's been the experience of some people. Enough that they could put one rural and the other agriculture. But prior to us engaging on a new municipal plan, we had people in the council that were promoting, get your severance now. So on rural land, it says you're eligible up to 3 severances, and that was sold as you're entitled to 3 severances. So that's part of the reason we had a big flurry and lost 100 acres in 1 year, because people were told that if you don't get your severance now, you may never get it. So I'm hoping that that's finally put a halt to, because we spent a lot of time going after those things, and we managed to get a requirement to have an agricultural impact assessment for every one of those lots. But that was a very frustrating and useless exercise because a lot of those agricultural impact assessments, I don't think they were worth the paper they were written on. Some of these farms they were never even seen, and very dubious quality in some of the remarks. So I think some of those people that were writing that, if they had any kind of a credential, they should have been censured by their credentialing organization. Like, it was disgusting, some of the things that, and county councils, oh yeah, we got this now, so it's good to go. So there was no process to object to a particular agricultural impact assessment and have somebody else look at it. From my understanding.
Just to add a little bit of credence to what you're saying, that top slide is cumulative numbers, right? So it's important to remember the severance, right? It's not for today and only today, it's for today and forever. And that top slide captures the cumulative numbers. So you can see, over that time period, and that's where the last 4 or 5 years in that data set is really encouraging, because you can see that red line, which is the ones on agricultural land, the blue line is across all sectors. But the red line, which is agricultural land, you can see how it basically flattens out, right? There's very limited incremental change happening. Whereas in the earlier decades, you can see the rate of growth, it's year after year after year. And that's why it's important that this be brought under control, which in many ways it has been compared to earlier decades.
I think we can't forget though, Wayne, that how recently was it that the government thought it was a great idea to have four lots severed. And so you cannot depend that this is always going to hold. So it's very important that you keep your eye on this. And when a government thinks it's a great idea to sever farmland to get more housing, blah, 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 you say, no, there's a line here we cannot cross. And that's our values. If we don't value agricultural land, then it'll just fly away at it.
That's a great point to mention, because who would have, back to that blue law, who would have thought the government would have floated a policy of that nature? Right?
I think you have to be careful too about the designation. So Dufferin has land that's designated as rural and land that's designated as agricultural. Waterloo did blanket prime. So there is really no rural in Waterloo.
I would say 99% of the land that was zoned rural in Dufferin is of no lesser quality than the adjacent agriculture.
Or it's been made more highly qualified, by drainage and all kinds of other, it now is as good as any.
And I would suspect, in my opinion, land that grows food should be designated as agriculture, not rural. That designation is problematic.
Yeah. So it's a good point of discussion. I know a number of counties where rural is not part of the designation. It's just prime as you've got there. I'm going to move on to the next slide momentarily. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So, and again, we can talk about the impacts of non-farm land use and agricultural land. I've got points on the left-hand side, but the image on the right-hand side, which is from the US, I think captures everything there. Notice this property is a farm. Farms have animals. Animals make funny sounds, smell bad, and have sex outdoors. Unless you can tolerate noise, odors, and outdoor sex, don't buy property next to a farm, which I think really captures the impact of non-farm land use on agricultural land. Go next slide, please. The 6th point to mention here is policy-led decisions, i.e. trying to make sure that different farms are treated the same. So whether you're a dairy farmer or sheep or turkeys, that the policy regime is reasonably the same across the board, right? That we don't treat sectors different, we don't treat farms different. We have policy in place that treats them all in a ubiquitous kind of way. Next slide, please. And I've just flagged this, won't go into these in a lot of detail, but current rural planning issues, and we'll talk about some of these in more detail. We'll talk about severance policies, MZOs, don't get me going, PPS and provincial plans and how that continues to evolve. How many folks are involved in an official plan update in your community these days? So yeah, I think every hand in the room went up. What does that look like? Natural heritage has certainly been a point of discussion in many counties and regions where people want a perception that that natural heritage policy will significantly impact agriculture. So it's to get our heads around that, because in my view, it's almost always supportive of agriculture as opposed to detrimental to it. Farmland conversion, farmland protection, said another way. Aggregates are a point of debate in the rural countryside. Energy projects, certainly a point of debate. And we'll come back to housing policy in a few minutes as well. But those are all current things that people might be thinking about. I think Peter's going to say, Wayne, you forgot to include such and such.
One thing that East Fairfax is recently having more issues on, Indigenous impact,
Oh, yeah.
right, on all development,
Yeah.
not just rural areas.
And what a change that, in a positive way, has been over time, but it certainly impacts the way that we do things. We'll come back to some of those as time goes by, but let's go to the next slide.
Can we just back up? So somebody said we need to be more future sighted. Is that you, Lisa? Well, anyway, there's a suggestion that we need 2 million acres for energy storage in the province. And just north of me here in Simcoe County, there's a 4,000 acre proposal for some National Department of Defense needs to have something there for radar or something. And
Tracy can speak to that one.
so we have this ongoing demand and transmission lines. There is just an ongoing onslaught. And the questions like the Department of National Defense, I don't think they ever occurred to them. Well, maybe this is farmland. It might be a national interest to protect it. No, we need to have this, and I'm not questioning the legitimacy of our need to have that technology for monitoring, but there was also a letter that I wrote that proposed it could be further north, in which case it wouldn't be on ag land at all. But we continue to have this sense that, yeah, the last best use for a piece of good farmland is the farming. Every other use is much better in the eyes of the majority of people, it seems.
Any other points in that? Let's just, so this is, again, some of the common things that we talk about in terms of planning for agriculture. Is this need to encourage a better understanding of ag and ag food systems, which I think is what, in a sense, Leo was just talking to. But all of these tools we use, I don't have ag impact assessments in there, which I should have, but MDS, minimum lot size, lot creation, on-farm diversified uses, balancing competing interests, and the role of the province. So those are all things that we try to get our head around from a planning perspective.
If I'm taking too much of your time, just shoot me down.
That's
Your initial slide showed
I-
wind turbines in Dufferin County,
Yeah.
and you mentioned energy. And I think, so I was asked if I wanted to have wind turbines on my farm, and in the end I said no, because I wanted to know precisely where they were going to put these service roads and where the turbines were going to be. But they cut up a lot of wonderful farms with these turbine roads that are still causing drainage issues. And I don't understand some of the planning around it, why, for some reason, you couldn't have a turbine road beside a municipal ditch. I just don't know why. So there's little areas, 2 or 3 acres here that are, because they haven't put the turbine road over, and they just wander here and there and everywhere. Sure, if you want to, it would have been nice if you had a lane right. So there was a proposal by some farmers, we should just do between concessions, have a road right at the back, because a lot of times people want to have access to the back of the farm to get grain or whatever way. But no, these roads are going all over the place. And some of these roads, a lot of them were initially about 10 or 11 meters wide, which are about 3 times the width of a lot of our service roads throughout the municipality. So it's taken a lot of land. And if theoretically, they're supposed to be able to bring it back to whatever if these things are ever decommissioned. But I guess I wouldn't hold my breath that that's going to happen.
Certainly lots of debates around that topic. Let's go to the next slide. So just as a light moment for a second. So here's a true story from Utah. Now I checked online to make sure it was true. The best I can find out it was. But city councilman, Mark Easton, lives in this neighborhood, had a beautiful view of the East Mountains until a new neighbor purchased the lot below his house and built. Apparently the new home was 18 inches higher than the bylaws would allow. So Mark, mad about his lost view, went to the city to make sure they enforced the proper height. Mark and his new neighbor had some great arguments about this, as you can imagine, not great feelings. The new neighbor had to drop the roof line, no doubt at great expense. You can imagine, he's built this house, it's too high, he's got to drop the roof line, it's going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars. Recently, Mark Easton called the city and informed them that his new neighbor had installed some vents on the side of his home. Mark didn't like the look of these vents and asked the city to investigate. When they went to Mark's home to see the vent view, this is what they found. So sometimes planning regulation has to fit the context. We'll go to the next slide. Planning aims to provide, again, why planning matters, it aims to provide stability and flexibility. And we see provincial policy, we've got the provincial planning statement of 2024. And although the province has done, I say this in a diplomatic way, weird and wacky things they've attempted to do through planning, it still provides that context, that framework that planning occurs under. Let's just go to the next slide and I'll point out a couple of examples. So I think this is a really interesting example. This is a former student sent this to me. And this is in Bowmanville, and it's a proposed development that happened after the Greenbelt Plan came into effect and it changed provincial policies in 2005. And you can see the area outlined in red. That's the area that was slated for development. And if we look at the lands to either side, over here and over there, those are lands that were developed in the 1970s. And you can see the size of those lots. So let's go to the next slide. So that's the infill development. And if you hit the one more button, you can see the 1970s development outlined in blue on the left-hand side. And you can see this little lot that was created in after 2005 as a result of provincial policy and the changes that put into effect, right? To me, it's incredible that you know what was happening in the 1970s in the post-2005 time period. You're probably putting 15 or 20 homes in the same space that one lot occupied in the 1970s. And it comes back to Mark's earlier comment that there are different ways of achieving higher density, and that may or may not be the ideal, but it certainly shows that you can still have single-family dwellings or single dwellings on a much, much smaller space than folks thought they had to have back in the 1970s. And for me, that's win for agriculture, right? Because you've achieved a higher density. That I think is an interesting outcome of provincial policy. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So I think the next point is working for a healthy environment. We talked about beaver dams earlier. I've attempted in this slide to bring a real focus to water, and as part of the environment, how important it is that you can drop a well and expect to get hopefully good water if that water is good by its nature, right? And but all of those other things that we value in rural communities alongside agriculture shown in that top left slide. Next slide, please. So again, I think planning is important because it provides that framework for discussions, right? It's how else would we do it if we didn't have a mechanism whereby people could talk about the outcomes, what the community needs to see happen. And we have official plans, we have zoning bylaws and land division and so on. And it's through those tools that people have that opportunity for discussion. Let's go to the next slide. And those numbers are going to be hard to see from here, but what it captures is a different way of looking at land use loss. And I pulled out the Dufferin statistics, and this is from 2000 to 2017. This isn't looking at severances. This is looking at official plan amendments that redesignated land from agriculture into an urban designation. And I'm going to step close enough to the slide, and I'll just pick out a couple of numbers for folks. So in Dufferin, in that 17-year time period, there were a total of 59 hectares that were changed from agriculture to an urban use. That represents a loss permanently of that 130, 140 acres over that time period. But it equal, a much larger number actually, is this is land designated as prime, put into some site-specific amendment. So it could be a golf course, it could be low-density residential. Municipalities did some innovative things in that time period. And I think it's 187 hectares that's looking at there. So the total amount of land converted over that 17 years through official plan amendments. And the reason why we track official plan amendments is once it's changed, it's almost certainly not going back, right? And it's a total, that bottom number is 246.8 hectares. So 550, 600 acres having been converted to a non-agricultural use. Yeah.
So this would just be land that was zoned agriculture.
This is land that was agriculture beforehand, designated as agriculture in official plan, and then changed into another designation.
So it wouldn't include any of the rural land that is actually agriculture land. So it'd be interesting for our county folks to come up with the stats for what's happened with rural. I think we got that all corrected down in our official plans. Is that right, Raj?
Well, we're going to do an official plan amendment. This will be our fifth one upcoming. And so we are planning on strengthening our ag policies. So yes.
So that would convert or change some of the rural lands back to agriculture, regardless of whether or not they had severance. And would they still allow some of the severances if they weren't built on? That's a very strong move. I suspect not. but we have a strong leader here in the county, so.
Peter?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to say about, that's a bit unique, this is the 5th municipality I've worked for where I am now. And that's unique in Dufferin County is that our targeted urban areas, with the official plan, we have three main ones, Orangeville, Shelburne, and town of Grand Valley. Orangeville and Shelburne, if you plan out for the next 50 years or so, they're at the point of being landlocked. And going back to Mark's comment, there's going to, like, not everybody wants to live in a high rise.
Right.
Some people do want to live in townhouses, some people want to live in detached houses, right? And as opposed to going to the 5-acre detached house, you can get in East Scarifaxa, right? With no services, right? There's that whole debate. So I guess the donut around these urban areas, for East Scarifaxa, East Scarifaxa, Amaranth, Mono, in Dufferin County, are part of the donut for Orangeville. And then there's the other donut around Shelburne up north. So is that, I guess that's a constant struggle, protect farmland, but you got to do a trade-off because of the growth pressures, right? So how do you accommodate that? I guess it's the urban boundary expansion pressures, right? And going back to, I think, yeah, is it that question, is it better to sacrifice the rural lands, the farmlands near the urban areas to protect further away the development, right? So that's that struggle, right? So.
And to try to make sure that you make good decisions through that process, because there's still, despite the changes going on with immigration policy at the moment, we can still anticipate millions of additional people living in the province over the next 20, 30 years. How do we make sure that we make good decisions as best as we can?
Sure. So building on that, one of the things that we have seen is that at this point in time, Orangeville is committing to building up instead of out for the next 20 to 30 years. Whether they're able to achieve that, we'll see that. The city of Hamilton, when they had to meet their targets, said we can meet that within our current boundaries. They don't need to expand. And that kind of conversation never occurred 10 to 20 years ago. It was always about expanding that boundary. And I think as we continue to have these discussions and bring the importance of agriculture to everybody's attention, going back to your comments, Mark, when you're sitting there with the city of Waterloo, and when we were doing that, at first they were, why are you here? But now they're going, oh, we know why you're here. I sit with those members at the Grand River Conservation Authority, and they're very supportive of agricultural policies before they didn't even think about it. So we are seeing a shift, and once again, this is the importance of what we're doing here for sure, making sure that they don't ever forget that. And somebody come up with this idea that we should have 3 lots per 100 concept. So
let's go to the next slide. So again, the opportunities that the plan can provide to expand the ag sector. We've got new policies in place related to on-farm diversified uses. We'll slide to the next slide. I think I've got background. I'll actually go back to that for just a second. That comes a little bit later. So it's this notion of does planning help us diversify agriculture? And if there was absolutely no rules, then we wouldn't be having this discussion, but we probably wouldn't like what's happening. So the rules are in place to help us achieve certain outcomes, and on-farm diversified uses are an example of the changing policy that can occur and what that might mean. Some examples there as well. Let's go to the next slide. So again, it's this notion between the future of agriculture and planning and how fundamentally I think those two are concerned. Next slide, please. And a little statement. So given, or if, but I believe it's a given, that planning is essential to the future of ag in Dufferin and Ontario. How do we put this into practice, especially when facing uncertainty and pressures like tariffs? Next slide, please. So I've put this together. So we've got key policy directions, and I've identified, 8 items there that I think are connected to ag uncertainty and tariffs. And hit the advance button, should some images come in? Yes. So farm worker housing and family housing, I think, are a really important shift in policy that's happening provincially and locally as well. So that top image is, how many folks are familiar with Hater turkey farms? A number of you will be. A big operation, turkeys in southern Dufferin County. That's a 24-unit farm worker housing that they got permission under the county policy and county plan to establish. And I've seen images of the inside. Sometimes farm worker housing has got a plunge wrap in the media. These are fantastic. I mean, they're appropriate for for workers. But I think that's a shift that's happening in terms of provincial policy, allowing that to happen in most municipalities across the province. I think we're embracing it. That bottom is actually where I live, and on our farm, we sold it to our daughter, and we built, at the time it was a garden suite, now it would qualify as a RDU, residential dwelling unit. It meets all the requirements in terms of sharing services close to the main farmhouse and so on and so forth. And those are things which have changed and evolved, and I think that's positive. Land use planning can help address ag uncertainty by allowing those options for housing as an example. Next slide. So the next one is encourage local and domestic markets, and we have Orangeville Farmers Market as an example. And the bottom one is a picture from Japan. Now the reason why I include that, because we don't have those strawberries here per se, but I had the good fortune of visiting Tokyo, right? And I spoke to a professor there, and he was talking about ag policies. There's more farmland in the city of Tokyo than there is parkland, which I thought was incredible. And then I'm thinking, well, how could anybody afford to farm in the city of Tokyo? He said, well, there's a $10 strawberry. And I thought, well, what? $10 strawberry? He said, oh yeah, people will pay the equivalent of $10 for a strawberry. So I believed him because he was an honest kind of guy. But I thought, really? And then we're at a market, right? A big market in Tokyo, and that strawberry in that bottom right-hand side, right dead center at the bottom, was in yen converted to approximately $10 Canadian. We bought the strawberries on the left, which I think were $13.80, so roughly $13 for the 4 strawberries. And they tasted like strawberries, but they were white strawberries. The point being, though, that people were prepared to pay a premium for a pristine product, right? And that not everybody's going to afford it, but some people, you're doing something special, you want that absolutely perfect strawberry sitting at the top of the wedding cake, whatever the case might be. Have you ever put strawberries in the wedding cake? Anyway, I just thought that was a really cool example of how, addressing local and domestic markets creates opportunity. Next slide. And this is just carries the Tokyo example a little bit further, but promote adaptive ag infrastructure. So of course, that image of the big grain drying facilities and elevators and so on is really important. But the bottom picture is also from Tokyo, and that's my daughter on the right-hand side, where there's a greenhouse in the city growing nothing but tomatoes, and you could go to the vending machine outside the greenhouse, and you could buy tomatoes. And you can see the tomatoes on the left, and they were quite reasonable. Like those 5 tomatoes were the equivalent of $3 Canadian. So it's not that everything has to be expensive; it addresses the local needs. I just thought that's cool, but it also comes from that adaptive infrastructure established. Next slide, please. Explore new opportunities. Okra is an example. That winery in Kern County is an example of how municipalities can assist. The county actually commissioned studies, this would be 15 years ago, about the climate of Kern County relative to producing grapes, relative to the potential establishment of wineries. And out of that, I think there's now 12 or 13 wineries in Kern County, and it all goes back to that study that the county commissioned looking at the climate and the slopes into Lake Huron and so on, which is an example of new ag opportunities in that case municipalities have facilitated. Next slide, please. And of course, supporting the strength in local agri-food supply chains. So potatoes is an example of, and I don't know the degree to which the potatoes are processed here in Dufferin versus in neighboring counties or regions, but it just speaks to opportunities that are there in terms of local supply chains. And that again is a role that municipalities can contribute to. Protecting, next slide, protecting farmland with flexibility. And I know there's a significant Anabaptist population here in Dufferin, probably primarily Mennonite as opposed to Amish. But again, it's providing policies to protect farmland that also addresses provides some flexibility. So for example, I suspect there are home occupation and home industry policies in Dufferin County at the local level, which allows people to do a range of things as of right automatically. And Mennonites with their shops is an example of people taking advantage of that situation. So we'll go to the next slide. I still got a little bit left, actually. It's one of those things, that bottle's empty, actually.
Oh.
Put it down in the next room. I'm good. Sure, why don't you refill it? Thanks a lot. I think I'm gonna lose my voice there. But anyway, ag economic resilience, you know, there's almost certainly ag economic strategies. In fact, that's the corporate strategy for Dufferin there. And how does that fit in with agriculture, right? How much attention has been brought to agriculture? Has agriculture had input into that? And a perfect example of that is the Dufferin County Ag Advisory Committee. Anybody here on that committee?
Well, I just want to make a comment. I know we've had one over the years, but I think it's kind of dormant right now and hasn't been active for quite a while. So I think the Dufferin Federation is trying to play a bit of a role there, but I agree that if we're not doing that, it would be good to have a Dufferin County Agricultural Advisory
That's not
Committee.
It's on Leo here. Thanks. Yeah, no, I think that's a fine point. Some counties, there's less need than others because there's a significant ag population on council. So, but you know, if we look at the population, the ag population across the province is a little bit less than 2%. There's often no councillors who have an direct ag background. So that's something to evaluate, but it's just to say that that is an opportunity to get the ag sectors involved. And we'll go to the last one, which again is this notion of supporting on-farm diversified uses. And I've spoken to it. The bottom left image is of the guidelines that the province put out, I think in 2018 or thereabouts. And I think municipalities are still trying to catch up to those guidelines in terms of how they deal with them. But it provides an avenue that, as I said in that example earlier in the presentation, you know, that as a young planner, I didn't have that policy framework to help establish what farmers could or could not do in terms of diversifying. So those are a range of things that I think are important. And we'll go to the next slide. And so the balance of my presentation is going to capture these, and I'll go through them relatively quickly so we have some time for this more discussion. But 10 lessons for municipalities, the province, and farmers. These are things that I think that we all can do collectively to get better outcomes and help address some of those needs that we can put into effect to deal with tariffs, as an example. But generally speaking, in the absence of tariffs, even, it's to expand the ag sector, right, to grow opportunities for folks. Go to the next slide. So the first is the importance of listening. And I know Mark said earlier, it's about more than just agriculture, but it certainly is about agriculture. It's one of the key inputs. And it reminds me of one of my very first involvements or issues in planning. I was working as a planner back in Dufferin County just after I graduated, and putting into effect a new official plan for my home municipality of East Wallinosh. And I had the responsibility of helping with that and then increasingly taking a leadership role in the development of it. We went through a process to start with where we had line meetings. Literally, we met with farmers in their homes on kitchen and concession blocks, like concession lines. And you know, like a group of 10 or 12 people, we meet in the kitchen and talk about planning. Really exciting thing to do. And then we went to a series of public workshops where we talked about agriculture, we talked about urban development, we talked about aggregates, we talked about the natural environment, and so on. And at each of these meetings, there were probably 100 people in attendance. And we did this over a series of 7-8 weeks. And at the back of the room, I quickly came to become familiar with my friend, the big burly stereotypical farmer at the back of the room, right? And he liked to stand up, he liked to heckle. He was a bigger man than this guy, but that captures sort of the feeling I had. In each meeting, I'd go away and I feel just a little bit smaller, right? But we got through the 7 meetings, I survived, and we went away, then we sat down with the elected officials and we went through the policy that was to go into the plan. And then, of course, after that, you go back to a final public meeting, not necessarily final, but you go back to a public meeting to present, here's the draft plan that we have. And of course, at the back of the room was my friend, the big stereotypical burly farmer. This time, he's not standing up, he's not heckling, and I'm thinking, my goodness, he's so angry, he's going to meet me out in the parking lot afterwards, right? But we get through the presentation, we get through the questions, and he still hasn't said anything. We get almost to the end, and finally he stands up and he pounds the table and he says, this is a good plan. We listened to what we had to say. And that's a lesson that stuck with me throughout my career in terms of the importance of listening, trying to accommodate what people have to say, and trying to work with those comments in a way that leads to what the community wants to see. Now, in a positive way, this was a really tight official plan. It didn't allow any severances. It didn't allow surplus residential severances because that's what the farm community was asking for. So just to speak to the importance of listening. Second item, a commitment to agriculture. I just think that it's really important that as elected officials, as planners, we recognize that agriculture is important. It's integral to the community, and policy needs to be supportive of that. And it can be demonstrated through a number of plans, economic development, and infrastructure as well. Next slide. So land use policy, having agricultural perspective and the importance of considering innovative approaches. So for me, it's not just about regulation, it's about the other things that we can do. So I don't know if Dufferin County, if you have a clean water project where the county puts money into it, but we have that in various parts of the
We have
province.
it in pieces.
In pieces, oh yeah. I know in Huron, as an example, in Waterloo, there are programs where you can apply to fence cattle out of a water course or improve your well. If you've got a dug well as an example, what are the considerations and so on and so forth. And I think that's an example of something which isn't regulatory, but is also very positive. Next one, please.
May I just say something about that, Wayne? And that is by far the most dollars that are contributed to that program come from urban Waterloo.
Yeah.
And I think that's significant.
Yeah.
That doesn't include the in-kind stuff done by farmers. The actual cash is contributed by people in an urban environment who see the significance of clean water everywhere in the municipality.
Yeah, I agree, because of the way the tract structure is based, and it just speaks to the benefits that quality land use activity on farms benefits people much beyond the farms themselves. Linking an ag systems approach, the new provincial policy statement puts that into effect for folks across the board. But by that, what does that mean, an ag systems approach? It's to think about, it's not just individual farms, but rather it's the natural system, it's government and infrastructure, it's the role of the nonprofit and community sector, and of course it's about agriculture. But all of those things are integrated so that, I often reflect, I've done some work in Northern Ontario, in the absence and the challenge of getting veterinarians, how that is negative for the overall ag sector. They're not farmers, but it's critical to the survival of the ag sector, right? And that's an example of thinking beyond just the farms themselves.
Me too. And I think that sometimes we don't think about this when we think of systems, the systems approach, and that is virtually every farmer has a system on their landscape of their farm that includes land besides the land where they grow food. So it may be a bush, it may be a stream, it may be something else. So it's actually not only a system in terms of the larger municipality, it's a system in terms of each individual farm. I think it's important to recognize that. And that system, without that system, you have nothing but, well, without all the rest of it, you'd have nothing but just fields.
Yeah.
And nothing but fields. But it's important to have all of it.
I agree. I was involved once upon a time with the Chatham-Kent Health Unit, because the county was trying to put into effect we used to call them tree cutting bylaws, now I think they're called forest conservation bylaws, if I remember correctly. And Chatham-Kent did not have that bylaw in place, and they were down to like 2 to 3% forest cover across the entire county. Yeah, it's really important to think about individual farms.
And the other economic supports to that ag system, the fertilizer dealers, all the folks that support the farm production have to be part of and noted in that farm system.
I know this a long time. Does anybody need to stand up and just stretch for 10 seconds before I was getting it like earlier.
Yeah, you've been standing here for an
Yeah,
hour.
if anybody needs to stand up and stretch it. Another half dozen points and we'll take a break, or we'll go into questions. But this fifth point is just to point out, the importance of managing conflict. I mean, that's one of the things that we attempt to do that I think has broader implications and positives. And certainly the minimum distance separation formula, there are people out there that might say, well, why do we do this? I think there's all kinds of good reasons why we use MDS in terms of helping to keep livestock and non-agricultural uses, non-livestock uses appropriately distanced from each other. That's an example on the left from British Columbia, looking at edge planting, is that relationship between the countryside and urban centers and spaces. My trusty person is going to push the button. We'll go to the next slide. Minimizing land fragmentation. I just think that's a fundamental goal that people will say, well, I can farm in 20 acres, and that might be true, but is that the right answer for 50 years from now? Right? So keeping land in sizable parcels as best as we can, in my view, does the best job of protecting our options for generations to come. And we can go back to that example of Essex County where they were having 6.8 severances per 1,000 acres over that 20-year period. In my view, almost impossible to reestablish a livestock sector there if society, if the economics, if things changed over time, right? Because it just becomes really problematic. Number 7. So development to evaluate the impacts of agriculture through ag impact assessments or specific content on the Dufferin County website to that effect. And I know, Debbie, I think you were saying you have done some work with ag impact assessments. It's this new tool that I think we're still trying to figure out how effective it's going to be.
I don't think it's that effective.
I mean,
It's lip service, I think.
But to me, the one thing that it does do that we didn't always do in the past is it forces us to at least ask the question, like, what is the impact of something on agriculture? And I don't know that we've always done that in the past. I'm trying to think some comment someone made to me earlier today, or maybe it happened in the presentation. Gets me thinking, we haven't always done that well. So hopefully in time we will. Rush?
I was just going to add, in addition to the ag impact assessments, what we've recently been trying to do more of at the county level is bringing in our federations, right? So talking to DFA, talking to OFA, trying to get their, I wouldn't say necessarily comments in relation to a particular application, but their overall sort of, I guess, feelings towards or opinions on certain types of approaches to development applications. And we've also just, by way of being courteous, have them be aware of applications that are coming to council. So if they were so inclined to come and speak to a particular application or put forward written comments, those are considered. So I think to your point as well of just sort of being able to speak to it, us pausing, thinking, reflecting, and listening. I think, you know, if we didn't do that before the application came to our table, the fact that it has been written about or spoken to at county council forces us to listen.
In some ways, if we call that ensuring an ag lens, we talk about a rural lens across the province, right? But if we call it an ag lens, I mean, that's really what we want to see happen out of this. If there's an ag lens that people are thoughtfully thinking about, this is going to do this for agriculture, or it's going to be a problem in this way. Whether we do it well yet or not, that's, I think, the question. Because I don't think yet we've got to that point because it's so new. But hopefully in time, it'll become more than a consultant simply saying, oh, this is wonderful. And then you look at it and say, is it really? But it's that notion of making sure that we're thinking about those things.
I agree with you, Wayne, that it actually forces people to think about the issue. So planners and municipal elected people and everyone for that matter. I'll just reference when it was used in an area near me where the proponent of a 150-acre gravel pit hired a company to essentially confirm that that gravel pit would have zero impact on agriculture in the community and would have zero impact on the municipal water source, which was 400 meters away. And so you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So when a proponent pays for a study, obviously they're going to pay for a study that's going to confirm what they wanted to confirm. How do you fix that?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, planners act under a code of ethics, right? Which should help there, whether it does or not, is another question. Because we've probably all been on different, you know, there's things which are obviously black, there's things which are obviously white, and there's areas which get to the gray, and then the question is what is influencing you in that regard, right?
Well, just to give you an example of what they might say, this particular organization that did the study said this 150 acres was only 0.013% of all the land in one of the region. So obviously its loss had no effect on agriculture in the region. Well, that's true. Well, the first part is true. Whether or not it had no effect or not, it wasn't really looked at. But so things get a little gray.
Yeah. No, to me, the question will be 20 years from now. We look back at this step off of this policy, right? Because it's been in place for some time, right? But across the province, not so much. And the question will be 20 years from now, we look back at it and say, that was the starting point of X, Y, or Z, which eventually led to more robust provincial policies that were helpful. So let's get through to the
Not really a question, and I know Leo already said this, but at Dufferin Federation, we are so very appreciative of the relationship that we have with the planning department and the economic development department as well. They're kind of one and the same. They work together. And, you know, from my perspective, working with two other counties, we're very lucky in Dufferin, and it is a real advantage. And I just wanted to express that, how important you guys are. Thank you. You're welcome.
I think over time, we've seen, you know, it used to be two solitudes, planning over here, economic development over here, and ne'er the two should ever even meet in the hall. But over time, we see that happening a little better, and some counties do it better than others. And because we are a smaller municipality here, we can do things maybe a little more nimbly than some other larger jurisdictions can. So, but, you know, thanks to folks like Raj that encourage the cross fertilization, we try very hard.
The relationship is incredible.
Well, it really depends on the predisposition you have coming into an issue. So looking at these agricultural impact assessments, aside from the fact that there's a very pretty stringent criteria on how that needs to be written, it can still be written in a very biased way. But at a council meeting where they're deliberating on the merits of a particular agricultural impact assessment, I don't think any of those councillors really was trained in, well, how should we look at this? What ultimately is our goal? So it could be that the goal is, yeah, there's still a fairly large, I don't know if it's a consensus, I'll say it's a consensus, that the best thing for a lot of our rural municipalities is having all these lots because it brings in all this development. And even though we've done these studies to show that rural residential development does not pay its fair share of tax for the services they require, there's this ongoing myth that it's good for development. So if that's your predisposition, you're going to be in favor of everyone. But I do think finally we're getting some people that are waking up to the fact that we're losing agricultural land at an alarming rate, and maybe it's not such a good idea. And we can be a little bit more discerning about where we allow and where we don't allow it. And I think the most recent reincarnation, I was involved in it peripherally, I would have been like more involved in Amaranth, that we've been able to tighten that up a little bit.
Folks, we've got another 3 or 4 slides. I just want to thank this fantastic discussion that's going on throughout the presentation. Thanks to it. I want to point out that, you know, economic development strategies, is there an ag component included with them, right? And how important that is. We recently did a housing study on behalf of the Greenbelt Foundation. We looked at a number of housing studies across the province.
PA to room 1, that's a PA to room 1.
Not Dufferin, but what was amazing is agriculture is basically not acknowledged. Right? The housing studies have been finished, but agriculture and the needs of agriculture really aren't. So let's make sure that there's an ag component to these kinds of important studies that are done. Next slide, please. And it's to create support infrastructure in support of agriculture. And that came up earlier as well. That center picture is from the Hensel facility. I mean, that's all private generated. But the point is, are the planning policies there to allow that to be established, right? Which is, it's the largest inland granary in Canada, right? That's that facility. And you know, an annexation happened probably 25 years ago that allowed the land to be added to that to allow for the expansion to happen. But it doesn't have to be big. It can be small things like farmers markets and other kinds of uses in the countryside and on farms that require certain kinds of infrastructure. I don't always mean water and sewer, but simply policies that allow certain things to happen. Next slide, please. And how important it is that we, you know, look to our towns and villages, because it comes back to the point that Mark made earlier. It's not just about what's going on farms and in the countryside, but it's downtown revitalization happening, it's intensification happening within our towns and villages, because that is a win for agriculture when we build better urban spaces and better communities. And housing opportunities are a good example of that for sure. Next slide, please. And just want to come back to our farmer that we talked about, that I talked about right at the outset, right? I don't know what the outcome for that man was and his challenges that he faced. Whether he's still farming there, I doubt it, because it was increasingly challenging what he was encountering. But what I do think is happening is in this room for sure is the goodwill towards agriculture, right? The notion that we can do things to help people, right? And that's whether it's in official plan policies, whether it's in your building approach to building permits on farms, you know, whether it's in your economic development strategies, whether it's the decisions councils make, that most of us, I think everyone has good intentions to work with agriculture to make things better. And if we can achieve that, then I think we can have better outcomes as a result. Last slide, I think, yeah. So it's a discussion, it's a chance for any other questions. If we'd had a little more time, and I'll pose this, do you have examples to share of municipal policy or action that has contributed to ag opportunities? But if there are any other general questions, I'm happy to try to respond, or not directly to the people that can actually answer the questions. So with that, I'll just...
I have a general question for you, Wayne. So this comes up, so a couple months ago, the county did a series session on housing. So the room in here is all friendly to agriculture. The room over there was all friendly to housing. I'm just, how do you stop NIMBY from settling in on any other plan? Right? So here it's to protect the ag, but then when you go to the, the people who have estate lots, they don't want high density neighbors. And, and then you go to the other areas. So how do you
I remember someone once said, I'm against severances as long as I get the last one. Right? And it's that perspective, right? How do you address it? Some municipalities, I don't know what's happening in Dufferin as yet, but this notion of as of right policy is increasingly relevant. I think an as of right can relate to on-farm diversified uses as an example, but in terms of housing, do you in your municipality, for example, allow on a farm parcel the additional dwelling unit policies that the provinces have?
We actually have an as of right policy in our township for those.
And to me, that's an example of one way that you can address some of that kind of stuff, particularly if it's that thinking is transferred over to an urban context, right? Because you're not likely going to have the neighbor saying too much about that on a farm parcel where it's such large space. But in an urban setting, you allow as of right of that extra dwelling unit. Do you allow 3-story walk-ups? And I don't know how far this goes. I know in Huron, as an example, we made a lot of progress building that kind of policy as of right. It gets complicated when you're dealing with big uses, right? Like a senior citizen's home or something of that nature, because you can't trust the seniors, right? It's all of those kinds of things that factor into it. That's one way that you can do it. The second way is, I think, is through education, right? Reaching out to people, trying to get the support of the Federation of Agriculture for these new policies, or the Home Builders Association, or whatever the case might be. So those are things you can do, but it's not to deny that in a specific instance you won't have a room full of angry people. Sometimes, that's what our policy should do. It provides that opportunity, that voice. Sometimes elected officials are going to agree with that voice, and sometimes you're going to say, no, that's truly based on unfounded facts or considerations.
I would answer the question like this, and it's from my experience in Waterloo. When you initially impose designations in the urban envelope, and you say this density along this transit corridor, this density along this downtown area, and so on, you have open and public consultation, and you come to an agreement of what it should be. And so, for instance, in this particular designation, no more than 10 stories in height. In general, if you build a 10-story building in that designation, everything is okay. But when you come in and you say, when the proponent asks for another 10 stories, then the people say, well, we all agreed on this height. Now you're imposing this height. You haven't been truthful with us. You have no credibility. I distrust you. You're wrong. I'm going to fight you. And I think it's really important that you get the designations right and you do the proper communication, the proper consultation. And then when a proponent comes in with something that is way out of line, you actually have to say, probably, this is the wrong place.
Good comment.
The other argument I would use is this, when people complain about what their neighbor does or what's happening in their neighborhood. And it's kind of a right-wing argument, but it's your private property. Should you not be able to do that on your private property? You're telling someone else they can't do something on their own private property. I think there are arguments that can be used to counter that NIMBY attitude. And one is, like I said, for goodness sakes, municipality, be credible.
I'm sure we'll have time to answer this one, and maybe we'll take it offline for some more discussion. But with the new PPS, have you seen any new settlements created or proposed that as a result would prevent existing settlements that are surrounded on all or most sides by private agricultural land being protected?
I know there's lots of discussions going on about that, and maybe people in the room that are more tied into that than I, but it's this notion of privately initiated amendments to redesignate lands. And I know in Center Wellington, as an example, quickly in here from Center Wellington, I know there was, I was talking with the planners some months ago, and they had like 10 or 11 applications for that. I don't know where they've gone to. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in that question, because I don't have a direct answer.
There's like 3 of them with the OLTR, right?
Okay, 3 of them. Be interesting to see what comes of them.
Thank you.
I have an issue sort of with a much broader context, and that's the very fact that our country is based on elections by population. And farmers are a dwindling number, and our voice, we have been louder in recent years or more, or listened to, but that varies. It goes in waves. And it wasn't long ago, and probably around 2018, when some leaders in our area, province, said, oh, it's just a farmer's field. And so it had very little significance. But I see that voting by population filters all the way down to lower levels of government as well, where the content always comes across, we have more people, or we have a larger, we pay more into this pot. So we should have a stronger voice. And it isn't always the voice that should be listened to. It can be, it's an overpowering urban area or an overpowering populated area that has that power. And we see it south of us here, where lands are just being, with new powers that have been assigned, lands are just being changed for purpose. So I just really am concerned about that going forward as we look to the future. How can we, as supporters of agriculture, change the voice, our voices, or to be louder and to be heard better, or to be listened to in a better way with that vast population who's far removed now from agriculture?
It's a tough question. There are folks here, the Connections Federation of Agriculture and Green Belt, Golden Creek. That name always tricks me up, Agenda. Other people here that have lots of insight into that. From my perspective, it's tough. It's a tough role because of the fact that agriculture is less than 2% of the population. But if I'm doing a meeting, as I'm here, I usually like to ask the question: how many people here like to eat? Right? And that. So it's to capture the attention. I think myself, in some ways, like the farm organizations, people may agree or disagree. I think they punch above their weight in terms of getting the ear of the province, because that 2% of the population does a pretty good job of having leadership that gets out there and makes himself heard. And I say that as somebody outside those organizations, but maybe does anybody else want to jump into that question, because I didn't give you a very good answer.
I can tell you, working in private consulting, so we're working on all sides of things, but one of the most effective things that I've ever seen for whatever policy implementation, it's just the priority setting from the decision makers. So planners will write reports based on policy. Your official plans will be written based on policy. It all filters down from the province, and I think all comments aside about what the province has done, I think in terms of what municipalities do is rely on that PPS that prioritizes those agricultural lands. And when you have decision makers that refuse to bend on that policy direction, it's the most powerful thing you can do. So the easiest example I have is we are based in Muskoka. And you want to talk about NIMBY titans, let's go to Muskoka, right? But what I watch and what I see in certain municipalities is when they have made a decision and they have enshrined it in their official plan, they simply refuse to go above it. It does not matter if you want 11.1% coverage. It doesn't matter if it's for a Granny Sweet. It doesn't matter if it's for the best reason possible. That is their hard line and they refuse to bend. So I can tell you, watching from a private perspective, that might go to an appeal. That might go to a settlement hearing. But their councils refuse to bend. And so I know in our firm, we will come, private people will come and they say, we want to do this. Absolutely not. We will not represent you. Absolutely not. We cannot. We know you're not, this is not going to succeed, right? So eventually the message will get across. And I think if you were charting this, you will see it flatline. And it's because your decision makers are hardlining. That's the most effective thing I have seen in my career.
Which I absolutely applaud if that's the case. But I see
Set the priority.
it can shift very easily, very quickly. You know, trends come in and trends go in that.
And councils come and go.
Correct. So it can just shift so easily. And so I'm, you know, in the long term, we have to be very focused on maintaining that kind of
And that
approach.
education piece that Wayne spoke about, if your councils understand the importance of that, whatever the priority is that you're setting, if they understand that and they can hold that line for you.
I want to make a point of thanking the folks online, because I don't know if you've been adequately, hopefully you could hear throughout and you've had a chance for interaction, but just to say thanks, because looks like all the names are still there, so that's positive if they've stuck with us throughout the time. So.
If you can share the screen, there's a couple of things, branches and things.
Thanks. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen. Oh, this is.
I did want to point, isn't my grandson the cutest ever? Well, wait a minute. I do that like this.
Go wise.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want some?
Later.
Let me show you this.
Wayne, I think we're very happy that you were able to spend some time in Dufferin County today too. And just, you know, these discussions take place at very many tables, but bringing folks together into one room and getting everybody's level of knowledge at a certain point. And again, I think we've heard the value of the municipal staff that we have here in Dufferin County and the kind of talent. I know in Mummer, we're certainly very happy with our planning regime, and now at Dufferin, the planning and economic development here, I think is just showing our value of the protection of agricultural land, and I hope we can keep that value front and center.
That's a great comment that I agree with that. I have a research project where we have monitored the potential within planning departments across the province to address agricultural issues. And throughout my career, I've watched Dufferin County as an example there, which didn't have much in terms of staff or much in terms of capacity to deal from a planning perspective with ag issues. And it's just great. My interaction with people reinforces exactly what you said. So.
Wayne, you said you couldn't think of anything more boring than announcing a meeting in the farming committee where you get to talk about planning. I'd be there in a minute.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect.
And
It'd be you and me.
I'm sure a lot of other people would too.
Yeah. It was interesting when we did that back in the day, because it was the first generation official plan back in the early 1980s, right? And like, what's planning, right? And, tell me what to do kind of thing. But it's those discussions so people come away with an understanding. And I think it stuck with people throughout their farming careers, right? Okay, yeah, planning can be a positive for us. And I would often go to public meetings and hear people moving in from, particularly from Brampton area as an example, where they bought farms here, and again, the recognition of good land use policies that can help protect the ability of farm.
I was going to say too, if I could, there are planners and then there are planners. And I think it's so important for elected people to endeavor to hire planners with vision, not just with the credentials to do the everyday things. They're really important, you have to do them. But planners with vision are so important to a municipality.
Not every planner has it.
It was interesting, when we did the tour of the fertilizer plant last week, I was speaking to the manager actually. He was talking about going to Guelph and he'd be hiring students that would come in. He said, I don't even ask them questions anymore about what they know about the industry. It's all about personality, right? Positive, constructive, helpful personalities.
And do.
Exactly. How important it is.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you. 9 o'clock in the morning would have been a lot better than 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I struggled as to whether or not I would come because I had, in my mind, very important things to do that I could have been engaged in, but I decided to come here. And it does remind me that conversations, talking, hearing points of view, and be prepared to change our points of view is so important in this whole arena. And I think there's nothing wrong with selling our vision, and I think maybe we need to do that a little bit more, because I think if you have discussions and people really think about it, well, do we want to lose this much land? Do we want to be food insecure? A lot of people would say, well, maybe not. You know, I just think a lot of people don't understand the importance of maintaining an agriculture capability locally and provincially and federally. So you got to add a couple more responsibilities, but you have tourism. You got to go on the road and have part of
Well, not very many of us. But on that note, thank you, Professor Campbell, for coming. Thank you for the great discussion. I was really pleased to see a lot of the same folks in the room that I often engage with, but I think it's important, Leo, to your point, for us to hear one another. And I think, yeah, the preservation of farmland is definitely important to Dufferin County, but how do we do so in a balanced approach, understanding that we have pressures as well. But this presentation was recorded, and so if anyone wants to go back and rewatch it or watch any of the other previous presentations that we've had throughout the year, they're all available online. And yeah, how about a round of applause for Professor Caldwell?
My applause for all of you.
I too want to thank Professor Caldwell. I'm one of his former students. So thank you for coming to Dufferin County. It's a pleasure to have you here and share your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are a superstar. Like, I hope you know that. In the rural planning context world, you definitely, I know when we announced that you were coming as one of our speakers, there was like a little buzz of like excitement around the community, and me being a nerd, I was like, yes. And so I was excited too. My brother is actually one of Professor Caldwell's former students as well. And I selfishly took a picture and I sent it to my brother, and he said, what, where are you? And so, yeah, so thank you very much. I think the conversation provided a lot of insights, and I think hearing from your perspective as well, having been a former planner working in the rural context and then applying sort of that theoretical long range vision approach is important for us to consider.
Wayne, I'd like to see that data updated from 2009 though. I'd really love to see it.
I would as well.
A research to do that.
All right. Good. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Canada.
Yes, sir.